Do you know who's behind your email? What do they fund? Are they building a culture you want to be a part of? This Advent, break up with big tech and reboot your email with Fidei. Look us up, Fidei, and there's a link in the description box below. That's Fidei, how Catholics send email. Just when you thought all the talk of synodality might slow down and eventually disappear for at least a short time, the German bishops are once again announcing a return to their synodal way. In case you don't remember, during the run-up to the Synod of Sin, the German bishops held their own parallel synod, which itself was not technically part of the larger church-wide Synod of Synodality, that some of you may have participated in at your own parish, although their contributions were then, or their findings were then submitted to the larger synod. The German synodal way ran from 2019 until just a few months before this October's meeting of the Synod of Sin in Rome. The German meeting was radical as well, earning it actually the ire of Rome, who issued stern warnings against what the Germans were doing. Many Catholics, desperate for any sign of orthodoxy from Rome, mistook what the warnings from Francis were really about. They actually thought that Francis was warning them that they were embracing heresy and schism, and that they should stop and rethink what they're doing. Instead, it became especially clear in those days that Francis was warning the German bishops against pursuing radical change alone, and that they should wait for the whole church instead of instituting the blessing of James Martin pairings or the institution of deaconettes or decentralization of the church into the hands of the laity by themselves. Most of that all became clear when Francis suddenly authorized priests to bless the James Martin crowd if they so chose to do so, along with the synod focusing on decentralization itself, leaving only the deaconettes question to be left unanswered, and yes, the promise of returning to the James Martin topic in this coming October's synod. But now we have the German bishops are in fact stepping forward and pushing for another synodal way meeting, which is promised to promote heresy and schism, and it's going to go until 2026. Yeah, it never ends. And the German bishops aren't wasting any time implementing Francis's authorization of blessings either. They love what's come out of it. Headline from Info Vaticana: German bishop asks his priest to bless James Martin couples. Are you surprised by this? I'm honestly surprised that it took a month after Francis made his declaration via Cardinal Fernandez for this to happen, and that it hasn't happened already, especially in America or Germany where these problems seem to be the most rampant. And it's not only blessings for the James Martin crowd either. From the article, quote, Bishop Karl Heinz Weissmann of the Diocese of Speyer has challenged the Vatican by publishing a letter on November 2nd in which he allows his priest to bless Jimmy Martin couples. The ceremony should differ from a church wedding ceremony in terms of words and signs and should explicitly reinforce love, commitment, and mutual responsibility in the couple's relationship as an act of blessing, he wrote in the 1,000-word letter. In the German bishop's letter, he calls for the creation of a brochure for use in German dioceses that includes suggested forms for blessing celebrations for various couples' situations. We're talking the remarried, those of a James Martin variety, and couples who got together after marriage. I'm not sure what that one means. Bishop Weissmann uses the gospel as he pleases to defend his doctrinal errors by stating that, quote, both with respect to believers whose marriages have broken down and who have remarried, and especially with respect to people with a James Martin inclination, it is urgent, especially in the context of a long history of deep pain, for a different attitude, and to have a perspective to find a pastoral attitude inspired by the gospel, as many of you have practiced for a long time. That is why I campaigned for a re-evaluation of the James Martin sin in church teaching in a synodal manner, and also voted for the possibility of blessing ceremonies for these pairings. I keep it. I hope that on the path of the World Synod, this pressing issue of our time can also experience a positive development, acknowledges this German heretical bishop. In his letter, Bishop Weissmann writes that, quote, no one is obliged to accept such blessings, but my request also means that no one who performs such blessings need fear sanctions, end quote. Perhaps they should fear the sanctions that'll come from God. Now, this bishop won't get any pushback on this, not at all, at least not in this life, especially in light of Francis's latest document okaying the baptism and godparenting by these couples. The timing of Fernandez's okaying of that abominable sacrilege in the church cannot be a coincidence, and it will lead to all kinds of sacrilegious images coming from parishes in the near future, like this declaration by Bishop Weissman will. But it doesn't happen in isolation either. The German Synodal Way is relaunching very soon. Headline from Katholisch.de, the official news arm of the German bishops. Stetter Karp to the Synodal Committee. Don't expect soft debates. The Synodal Committee should continue the work of the Synodal Way. But before it meets for the first time next week, some questions still seem to be unanswered. In the Katholisch.de interview, ZDK President Irme Stetter Karp comments and explains what she expects from the committee. Okay. Irme Stetter Karp is a modernist nun, right down to her lack of habit, her haircut, and her makeup and jewelry. She is literally all business, advocating for changes to the church's morality as if she were a board member at a major corporation debating some really critical human resources policy change. I'm always left wondering, whenever she comes up in my news feed, why she didn't pursue a career in nonprofit management or in the private sector instead of the religious life. From the article, quote, "The Synodal Committee emerged from the Synodal path and is intended to continue it and prepare the establishment of a Synodal Council in which bishops and lay people want to hold discussions about reforms in the Church from 2026. Despite the failed financing via the Association of Dioceses of Germany and a lot of criticism, especially from the Vatican, the committee's inaugural meeting will take place next Friday and Saturday, November 10th and 11th, meaning these happened this past weekend. Now, as with the Synodal Path, the sponsors are the German Bishops' Conference, DBK, and the Central Committee of German Catholics, the ZDK, both of which theoretically send 27 delegates. There are also 20 others who were elected by the General Assembly of the Synodal Way. In an interview, ZDK President Irme Stetter Karp explains what can be expected from the committee, what the current open questions are, and what influence the results of the World Synod may have on the work, end quote. Now, we don't have any news yet about what they decided, but when they do, I will present it to you if it's important. In this initial meeting that was procedural, most observers likely think that its outcomes are going to be inconsequential, but here's the reality of what's going on. Prior to the Synod of Sin, the bishops of the German Synodal Way managed to avoid having the worst heresies embraced by the German Bishops' Conference because of procedural rules, including by requiring not only 2/3 of the bishops present to support a matter being voted on at the assembly, but that there be a quorum of 2/3 of the bishops present at all before a decision can be voted on. Do you see why that's important for them to change that which is the focus of what they're doing here? That issue of quorum is on the docket for the next phase of the German Synodal Way to vote on. I'd be surprised if they didn't bring up Francis's notion of synodality as well by demanding hand-picked laity be allowed to participate in the synodal proceedings. In Germany, like in many other Western countries, I hate to say it, but the laity who overwhelmingly support the rethinking of morality as taught by the Church. The laity are often leading this sort of ape of the church movement themselves. They are the mechanism in many places for driving this demand for change and revolution in the church. Now, as evidence of this, also from Germany, we get news that a German bishop has already authorized laity to perform baptism in an official capacity. And I've mentioned this a little bit before, but I'll do so again here. Anyone can baptize in the church under the right circumstances. The church requires under normal circumstances that baptisms be performed by a priest or deacon at the parish with official authorization. But in an emergency, anyone can provide the sacrament of baptism to anybody who requests it, or even a child. Can even be done by a non-believer as long as that person doing the baptizing follows the form and uses the proper substance for the baptism and, importantly, intends to do what the church does when she baptizes someone. That's really it. The difference here is that the laity are being officially authorized to do this in Germany on a regular basis, which is, of course, a novelty, to put it mildly, and it's not a good thing. And the plan isn't to limit this to baptism either. From the LifeSite article, quote, Katholisch.de quotes lay theologian Ursula Renner, who called the decision to allow lay people to baptize a first step to be followed by others, like the administration of sacraments of extreme unction and matrimony by non-ordained ministers. Some allowances for lay people to administer baptism have already been issued by other German bishops in the dioceses of Essen and Osnabrück. In Essen, it was primarily women who were commissioned to be extraordinary ministers of baptism. While Bishop Franz Josef Overbeck of Essen cited a, quote, lack of priests as justification for using lay people, the Bishop of Rottenburg-Stuttgart did not attempt to find a similar excuse. Bishop Franz Josef Hermann Bode of Osnabrück stressed that, quote, he wants to strengthen the role of women when he introduced lay people as extraordinary ministers of baptism, end quote. It's always ideology, and not faith, at the center of these changes. Remember that. It's not faith driving this. It's a desire for worldly acclaim. It's a desire to be accepted by the world. It's why these prelates have adopted secular thinking as the driving force behind their revolutionary ideals. They will answer to God for the things they've done someday. Pray for their interior conversion, and pray for the handful of German bishops holding out against this nonsense, because there are some, hence why they couldn't get the worst of their ideas through. What do you think about all this? Are you surprised at all that the German bishops and their conference, led by a nun that acts like a business person, that they wasted no time after the closing of the Synod of Sin to reconvene and get going the next phase of their own changes into the church in Germany? They're doing it without Rome. They don't seem to care, but they seem to be reinvigorated by the things that happened there. Remember that as some people ponder inevitably or bring up inevitably that the Synod on Synodality didn't change a thing. Remember, the Synod on Synodality is not over. And two, most of the radical things that we thought there was a chance to happen happened before the Synod. And the real mechanism for implementing the worst ideas are in the final synodal document. And that is the decentralization of the church. And that is one thing the German bishops are absolutely going to be tackling between now and 2026. Let me know what you thought of this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.